Hello, welcome to Cloud Native Live, where we dive into the code behind Cloud Native. I'm your host today. My name is Whitney Lee. I'm a CNCF ambassador and I'm a developer advocate at VMware Tanzu. So every week we bring a new set of presenters on to showcase how to work with cloud native technologies. We'll build things, we'll break things, and we'll answer your questions. So this week we have this guy, Victor Farsick, here with us to talk about dumbing down developer platform consoles. But first I have to go through the code of conduct thing. It's an important thing. So this is an official live stream of the CNCF, and as such, it's subject to the CNCF Code of Conduct. So please be respectful of all the fellow participants and respectful to Victor, which is kind of hard sometimes. I get it. Be respectful to me too. Friends who are joining us live, please say hi in the chat and tell us where you're tuning in from. And as always, if you have questions, please do ask them in the chat. We're going to get to them right away and make this feel like more of a conversational format. And with that, I'll hand it over to Victor to kick off today's presentation. Hello, Victor.
Okay, what should I do now?
You're supposed to teach us about
Okay. So the big reason for this is that I want to demystify something. And what I want to demystify is that Whitney is very good at drawing things, and I'm going to prove her wrong. I'm going to prove that I'm better than Whitney at drawing.
No, nobody said I was good at drawing things, but okay, yes, let's do it. Let's prove Victor's better than Whitney at drawing things.
Yeah. So what I want to talk about is developer portals. Many people call it IDP or internal developer platforms or developer platforms or what's not. And when they talk about that, what they really very often mean, completely mistakenly mean, that having a portal means having a UI, right? You get Backstage, you get, I don't know, whatever other tools cool kids are using, and you actually, let me draw that. And you just put it on top of whatever you're having, right? And that's wrong. And here's why it's wrong. Yeah, I need this. Wait. Okay, cool.
Do you want me to share your screen? Where's the drawing going to be? I'll share your screen.
It's going to be on a screen. Where else do you want? I mean, I can do a paper if you want.
I've seen you draw on like the camera in front of you. Okay.
Yeah.
We got the screen
there
shared.
We go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is happening in this? Let's start with what is a developer platform, right? The developer platform should be a way how people can expose services that other people in the company can use, right? Oh, I want to create and manage application. Here is a service for that. Hey, I want to create, manage, do whatever I need to do with databases, clusters, whatever I'm doing, right? So it's a way how to expose services to, let's say, developers, right? Developers is a wrong term because everybody's developer. Everybody writes code one way or another, even if that code is YAML, right? Now, what is happening in reality is that companies have accumulated stuff over time, right? And that's normal. So you have a bunch of scripts, right? Okay, that's S, right? And then you have, I don't know, some Ansible stuff. And you have some, I don't know, maybe some HCL from Terraform. Doesn't matter what you have. Oh, you must have Perl. Perl is unavoidable. If you don't have Perl, you're in a startup. You're not in a real company. And then so on and so forth, right? So you have a bunch of things, and all those things are happening somewhere. They're made with different formats, different technologies, so on and so forth. And now it's normal when you have a person over there who is not a Perl expert or didn't spend 7 years learning whatever else there is to be learned, that person just gets completely confused, right? Kind of, okay, so what am I going to do? To get the cluster, I should execute some Perl stuff, and I should go to some Ansible thingy, and when I finish with that, I should run some scripts, and so on and so forth, right? It's just a mess. Now, what people usually do is say, okay, I'm going to fix this mess. I'm going to make this mess better. I'm going to make it so nice. You will never want to change a company because this is going to be beautiful, right? It's going to be beautiful because we are going to create a web UI that is going to be going to have at least 15 colors. It's going to be full of colors. It's going to be full of buttons. It's going to have some emojis over there, and it's going to be amazing, right? And then you will be able to interact with that web UI, and web UI is going to interact with all the stuff that we have over here, and it's going to go around and around and around and around and do everything that needs to be done, right? And that's where the confusion starts, right? Because if you just build a web UI, now I'm trying to find the word, I'm going to use Spanish, your caca still smells. It's just that you're wrapping it. I did not break the code of conduct. Correct me if I'm wrong. It still smells. It's still horrible.
Yeah.
It's just that now you have additional complexity. This thing here, this web UI, is going to never work simply because there's too much complexity to put on top of a user interface, right? And it will be failing, it will be complicated, and the amount of work is just going to be silly. So what we've been doing now is slightly different, right? You still have a mess. We cannot remove that mess. That mess is somewhere in your system, right? But then we've been building some APIs on top of that. So say, hey, you know what? I can code this API, I can write it in whichever language I want, and that API will be accessing those services. And then, dear front-end developer, the one that is making a web UI, or CLI, or, I don't know, VS Code, something, will have a much easier time to build it simply because those things will be dumb, right? They just go to the API, they ask stuff, they ask questions, and they get answers to those questions, right? And that API can be anything. It can be, I don't know, in my case, it's going to be Kubernetes API because it's 2024, but it could be any other API you want to build. I don't care about that part, right? Now, the problem we're having is that the tools made for those web UIs tend to be behind, right? Tend to not live in 2024, because what is expected from those tools, which I'm not going to name, is to create some forms over here, some fields, some forms, and stuff like that, basically to replicate all the options that we have in the system, right? And that's going back to the previous problem. It's a lot of work because then you need to maintain the definitions of APIs, right? And the same thing here. This is the same as that. This is exactly the same as that, right? It's a lot of work, a lot of maintenance, never up to date. So what I've been looking for, and that's why I started this session, is something slightly different. And that's to find a tool that will actually go to the API and say, you know what, tell me what you have. Give me the information. What can people do by interacting with you? That information is propagated up to the web UI, and all those forms and fields and everything that you need to interact with that API is auto-generated, right? And if we can do that, then we can save a lot of time, reduce maintenance, make it snappier, and still maintain all the pretty colors that we want.
So
yes.
So you in your gorgeous drawing.
First of all, isn't my drawing better than yours?
I've hands down. I've been beat. You have like 5 boxes that's like the lower level complexity, and then 5 boxes in the web UI. Are those meant to correlate with each other? Like I
Not
guess
necessarily.
Okay. So
Not
the
necessarily,
API
because
choices are not related to the lower level choices. They're just different.
No, they're so those things here. That's what you're referring to, right?
I've talked about
Let's say
all
that
3.
API exposes a subset of those. So you can
Okay.
say, hey, you know what? I'm going to use a different color here just to make it pretty. This, people should be able to create this, and people should be able to create this, right? But then there
Mm-hmm.
is something else internal that will be instantiated by those. Maybe
Okay.
internally within the system, some resources will be creating and managing other resources and so on and so forth. So if I would use Kubernetes as an analogy, right? You have deployment, replica set, and pods. Replica
Mm-hmm.
sets created and managed by deployments, pods created and managed by replica sets, but the user just defines their deployments, right? So it's a
So,
subset of those three.
so we're talking about two things. One thing is using the API to have opinionated packages of things of what's available. So you're using the API to simplify choices for what's available to the end user.
Not to
As a
simplify,
but
to
yeah,
expose them,
expose them. Okay.
right? To kind of, you go to this API and you ask, just as when you go to API of anything else, like let's say
Mm-hmm.
AWS, right?
Uh-huh.
Hey, API does not simplify AWS. AWS
Mm-hmm.
enables you, AWS API enables you to communicate with AWS and say, I want a virtual machine.
Got it. And so the web UI, what you want it to do and nothing more is help make whatever's available, whatever's exposed by the API, help make it discoverable.
Yes,
Okay.
that's exactly what I want. And actually, if we use Kubernetes, and again, doesn't matter, I will be using specific tools today, but whatever I'm saying applies to any type of tools. It doesn't really matter. Um, uh, APIs are discoverable, right? You can go to Kubernetes API and say, you know what? What do you have? You have a deployment? Excellent. What is the scheme of deployment? What are the fields that I can use? You can go and ask the API right now, right? Be
Mm-hmm.
using any tool you want. Now I want, just as I as a person can go and to go to the API and say, give me the schema. I want the user interfaces to do the same and say, hey, tell me what is the schema of the information that you expect me to send to you.
Got it. And then the problem that's being solved is what? The web UI is doing more? Like this seems so
No, so
logical to me that I'm wondering what people are doing instead of this.
exactly, but what you would be doing, what most companies are doing still, unfortunately, is you go to some web UI, let's say Backstage, and I'm not now slamming Backstage just to visualize it somehow. You would go there and create page number 1 for, let's say, creating databases, and then you would create a form. You would literally code the form and say, okay, I need this field, I need that field. You would basically recodifying the things that you already have somewhere else, right?
I see. Yeah.
Basically, you would be repeating the code that generates almost exactly the same information that already exists.
Okay. So we want that to be discoverable and sourced from the API instead of coding it from the first place.
Yes,
And you're going to show
exactly.
us how.
I will.
Excellent. Do you
I
know,
will.
can you, I have this mystifying comment. Clemens said, I can't believe it, but he thinks your illustration's hideous. I can't understand.
is.
I thought it was absolute perfection.
I mean, I'll work on it. Kind of. So what I need feedback from Clemena, from Arnold, is how can I improve? Would more colors help? Thicker lines? I don't know. I'm joking. Drawing is not my thing. So
This is great. It was entertaining, if nothing more.
the alternative would be blank screen because I have no slides. So it could be this.
Cool. I prefer the drawing. So you're gonna show us how we're gonna do this with the web UI that makes an API
Yes, I will.
discoverable.
So
Yeah.
what I will do is share my screen first. No, not share my screen. Put this on a screen. Tell me if it's too small or too big or whatever, right? So now this is an example, right? That I can. So by the way, this is port. I'm using port today. The same logic applies to any other UI that anybody wants to use. The logic is still the same, right? Now, what traditionally people would do is new data sources and say, I don't know, I want this or that, and then fill in some fields, do some stuff, and eventually get it somehow, right? Eventually reach the point that you have all those fields. Now, what I will do instead is go to data sources, and in this case, say, I have this one. I did this in advance. I wrote this query that basically says, you know what? Go to the cluster, find what is available there, but then limit the output because there might be too many things. I have like hundreds of CRDs or thousands even in that cluster. Find things that have the kind set to this, whatever this is, composite resource definition, and I want only those resources that can be created on a namespace level, right? So some kind of filtering so that I don't end up being overwhelmed with what I'm getting, but focused only on certain things, right? Some other people might limit it by labels or annotations or whatever. That's, if you remember my beautiful drawing before, right? When you ask, hey, is it one-on-one? No, not necessarily, right? There are some internal things that others should not care about. So with this query, I'm saying those are the things I care about. And then I click resync. And now what is happening is that in this case, port is going to Kubernetes API, retrieving all the resource definitions that match this criteria. And hopefully, if it works, my demos are usually fail, but hopefully not at the very beginning. If it works, we should get the schemas of all the resources in the cluster that match that criteria. And that might or might not work. I'm going to give it a minute. I think that it synchronizes every minute or so or something like that.
I'm on the edge of my
or
seat.
maybe it's not working. Let's find out. Dash namespace port something. There we go. Get pods logs. Let me see whether it's working first. Maybe it's not. Yeah, I think it's working. Let's refresh. Yeah, look at it. So it found that there are three things, whatever those things are, right? It's completely oblivious. It does not know what I want. It does not care about any of those things. It went to the API, asked what do you have that matches that criteria, and find that there is something called SQL claim and something called cluster claim and something called up claim. And it also created some actions. Oh, so you probably want to be able to create those, you probably want to be able to update those, and you probably want to be able to delete those, right? You just made some general assumptions of what I might want to do with those, right? Now, by default, this might actually, let me show here, edit, right? Those are the fields that it discovered, or some of them that it discovered. Some of them are still hidden because you might not want all the fields and what's not. So now what I can do is either leave it as is or modify it, right? So you can, and this is basically inverse direction, right? Instead of starting from scratch and trying to replicate everything that exists somewhere, we get things from there somewhere automatically, and then we can fine tune it if we want, right? So for example, I can, and this is just to annoy everybody, I can go and modify it in JSON format. And for example, let's see, composition ref name. I want this field that by default is invisible. I can make it visible by not making a typo and saying true. There we go, right? And save it. And now I have, where is it here? You should see that additional field was added somewhere, maybe. Or
so
maybe
is
not.
this
We'll
meant
see.
for the, for lack of a better term, platform engineer to like change the UI to expose something for end users in a certain way, but in a discoverable way?
Yeah, so basically everything you see on the screen now was discovered, right? You just went to the
Yes, I
cluster and
understand.
say, now it's if you want to change, maybe for example, let's say, where is it? Composition revision ref name, the one that I just added. Maybe I don't like the default name from the API, and I would like people to be able to see something different on a screen, right? So this is fine tuning.
So you're still a platform engineer and you're designing a UI, a web UI for your developers to access what they need. You're not a developer going in finding discoverable stuff at this
No, no, no.
level.
I'm still a person who wants to expose services to developers.
Okay.
Yeah, that's who I am.
All right.
And I can, for example, in case of databases, for example, I can give them three options and say, hey, instead of you typing the composition name, no, this is a typo. Look at it there. Catch it. There we go. Composition. Instead of typing the name, for example, and this is not since options are not available in the schema, I can say, hey, I'm going to let you do AWS and Azure, and let's give Google so that nobody gets offended as well, right? And so I'm just slightly modifying the default experience that was discovered from talking to the API, right?
Wait,
Does it
so
make sense?
did you just change what's at the API though? Like you said there are not like providers in the API schema that you
So
got
I'm
and you added them?
no, not edit. What I did was to change the name that was exposed. So let me show you actually
Ah.
discard changes. So right now, if I see click create, people can fill
Uh-huh.
in those fields, and those fields were discovered from the API, right?
Okay.
And maybe I would like now to slightly fine tune and say, you see those composition revision ref name, that's kind of unintuitive. Maybe I should go and say this thing should be called differently. Where is it? Composition ref name, and I'm gonna call it, I don't know, composition, right? You're just modifying the
Got it.
information or the beautifying slightly
Beautifying.
the information that was retrieved through the API,
Okay.
and which for some reason was not saved when I did the first time, so I'm going to do it again, just because I can.
Is there an easy place where you can see how these map to one another, what you named it and what it's actually pointing to?
Oh, fuck, it doesn't work for some
Hey.
reason. Save. Oh, that's cultural differences. That's in my culture. That's acceptable. I don't know why. Let me see. Composition. Why it doesn't work? Now it does. I'm messing. There we go. Yeah, it works. It was just dumped for a second, and now I have two compositions. I don't know why. But hey, I'm gonna delete one of those. There we go. Composition. There we go. Anyway, I forgot what you asked, Whitney. So you will need
My
to ask again.
my question is there an easy way for you to see what your names map to in the schema?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like,
So let me go back here in edit. Easy depends how you define easy, right? But so this is what we got from the schema,
yeah.
right? And this is what will be displayed on the screen. So
Ah.
title by default is the same as what we got from the from the API, right?
So you are changing the schema when you
No,
beautify things.
I'm just changing metadata in the port in this case itself, right? Schema
Okay.
is the same. The API, I cannot touch it. I mean, I can, but
Okay.
I'm not going to.
Okay.
Okay,
Yes.
and that should be it. Now, there is one more thing that I need to change, and I'm getting bored, so I will not do more than one more. Is that
Y'all
here.
ask more
Now,
questions so Victor's not bored. Let's entertain Victor with our good questions.
So, what did I want to say? Yes. So, the schema, there are two things that will need to happen, and this is now going to the grandiose GitOps workflow CI/CD plan. What I
Love
want is when people go to the UI, they say, I want to create this. And then that information is sent to Git, in specifically to GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions create some files that are required for people for that something to happen. Push those files to Git, and then Argo CD synchronizes from Git to my cluster, and then bada bim, bada boom, and the magic happens, right? I get that database resource or application or cluster or whatever it is. Now, for that to work, and something that is definitely not discoverable, is that the schema does not know that schema knows what is schema does not know that there is Git repo where things should be pushed and things like that, right? So I'm going to here define that it should go to this organization. It's going to be port CRD's demo. This is the repo that I'm using today. And what else? And this is the file, the GitHub Actions that should be executed, right? So basically, this is the only thing that I couldn't figure out yet, but I will, how to make discoverable. I could probably put some labels to my scheme or something like that to discover it. But anyways, I'm going to let port know that whenever somebody creates or updates or deletes something, that should be pushed to Git. I don't want port to communicate and do anything in my cluster. That's why we have GitOps. I just want it to gather the information and push it to Git, to GitHub Actions in this case, and that this GitHub Actions is GitOps YAML, right? And that's the maximum I could fiddle with JSON and forms and pretty colors.
You're saying ideally it would have read-only access to your cluster to be able to pull the schemas?
Yes. Read-only, not ideally. It should have read-only for two reasons. First is to be able to pull the schema and find out what can be done there. Mm-hmm. Second reason is for observability, which I'm going to get later, because it goes from UI to Git, and then Argo CD or Flux synchronizes it to the cluster, and then cluster does something with it. And I need to give the information back to the user who started this whole deal. Hey, it's running, or it's failing, or I need to give some information back, and that information will be available in the cluster. So port, in this case port, but any other tool should have read options also to gather that information, not only the schema. Make sense?
Got it. Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to say create, and then I'm going to choose AWS. I'm going to call this something. How should I call it? I don't know. Silly demo. For some reason, I always call everything I do is a silly demo. The name is going to be the same. I can choose a namespace. Let's say that I want that something to be in 18. The size should be fine. And since this is a database and it's Postgres, I'm going to run 16.2 version, just right. So this is what I do as a user. I just fill in some fields and I click execute. And now it might or might not work. This is going to be exciting part because I honestly have no idea.
How do you know what available choices there are? Is there a way in the port interface? Because you type 16.2, for example. What if you wrote a number that doesn't exist?
That's the part of me getting bored. I should have, if you let me go back actually here. Here you see composition, I said, okay, you can choose one of those options. If I wasn't too lazy, I could have given options here for the available versions, right?
Okay.
I could have went and said, okay, those are the available options, and then you get a drop-down list or something like that. Because again,
Okay.
this is also something not available in a schema. So I'm doing the last 10%, maybe not the first 100. And this should have executed GitHub Actions here. There we go. There we go. You see, so what happened is that that GitOps YAML, if you remember, I specified in the form that I wanted to execute something called GitOps YAML. That was executed and it was pushed to a Git repository, right? So that's the only thing it did, right? And if I go, actually, let me, I promise that I'm going to be artistic, but my drawing skills are at the limit, so I actually did draw something in advance. So what happened, actually no. This is supposed not to have slides. I'm gonna draw it again. Look at me.
Good. Clement said more fuzzy line work, please.
More fuzzy, is that me drawing? Excellent. So here's what happened. I have port. No, why is this not working? Let me see. Wrong screen. Come on. Here we go. So I had a port that went to a Kubernetes cluster. So this is Kubernetes. I'm drawing slower so it is nicer.
It is nicer.
It went there and it discovered the schema of some resources, not all, and it created forms, right? So this is, if this is port, we have a form with fields and another one with fields. I think if I remember correctly, it discovered 3 of them, right?
Yes.
Now, the way how those custom resources like database cluster and application were created is that in the background I had crossplane that I used for 2 reasons. First is to create those custom resources, and later on it will do something else. Now a user, this is me, went to port, filled in one of those forms, and port, all it does, actually this is wrong. There is no this direction, right? It just retrieves information from the cluster. So what port did is it went to Git and executed GitHub Actions. So it passed the information that I filled in, like small database, 16.2 version, what's or not, passed it to GitHub Actions, and GitHub Actions, what it did in turn, and I will show the code of all of those things, it generated a file, a YAML file, Kubernetes manifest, and it stored it to a repo, right? So this is, repo. Now, at the same time, what was happening, I did not show yet, Argo CD is running as well, and it discovered a new file, or updated file, or deleted file, and it said, you want to have that in your cluster, excellent. Let me create it here. So those are CRDs, and it created a CR with whatever, SQL claim or something like that. And since this custom resource was created by Crossplane took over and created the database in AWS. And that database with RDS, it did actually more things. It created some Atlas schema with the Atlas operator. It created some users in that database and so on and so forth. It created all the but all the low-level details required to operate a database, right? And if there are questions, throw them to me. Now let's jump into the code, right? How all that happened. So if you look at this is my cluster. If I look at custom resource definitions, you can see that I have a bunch of things. Probably, let me see, bc-shell, a few hundred probably, right? So this cluster has 237 different resources that could be created if you have access to it. Many of them related to AWS, some related to Google, some related to cluster itself, and so on and so forth. Now, if I would present all that to end users in a web interface, they would go crazy. Like, oh, what do I do with VPN gateways? Nobody knows what is a VPN gateway anyways. So what I told Port, actually what I got here is grep DevOps. Those 4 app claims, apps, cluster claims, composite clusters, SQL claims, SQLs, right? Now, if you remember what I got in Port, I got 3 of those because half of those are cluster scoped, half of those are namespace scoped, and I said, hey, give me only those that are namespace scoped. So basically, essentially, Port discovered that I have something called app claims and cluster claims and SQL claims, right? And what Port did is exactly the same as what I'm going to do now. Explain app claims DevOps Toolkit series. DevOps Toolkit series.com recursive, right? So this is what you can do as a human. You can go to Kubernetes cluster and say, explain to me or give me schema of any resource you want. And you get information like, hey, this is a spec, and spec has this field and that field and that field, and so on and so forth, right? Port did essentially the same, equivalent of this. Went to the cluster and find out, okay, so if you want me to do something with this thingy, whatever the thing is, tell me what are the available fields. And it got those, and all those that are marked as required, put on a screen by default, and then I can enable others that are not required. So that's what I have in cluster. That's what Port discovered. And when I filled in that form and clicked the execute button, the Port sent it to GitHub Actions. And GitHub Actions that was executed is this one. Now, this might look intimidating, but it's actually a very, very simple one. Check out the code, install JQ, Port GitHub Actions, which basically just authentication to Port. The only really action is here, that I'm saying, you know that manifest that Port generated, give it to me, extract the kind and name and namespace so that I can generate the path, so that I can generate the name of the file that I want to have. And if the action is to delete, then remove it. If the action is anything else, then just copy it to that directory, to that path, and that's it. And then push it back to Git. So basically, essentially all I'm doing is generating a file with the contents passed to me from the UI and pushing it back to the same repository, nothing else. And now if I pull local copy, you will see here's the file that was generated for me, right? And if I output it, this is the file. This is the file generated by me filling in the form, and the form was generated automatically through the schema, right? That's the same small and 16.2 version and AWS PostgreSQL. All the same, essentially the same information.
So it's probably worth saying that with Crossplane, you have let's think, it's been a while. You have a resource, a composite, where you can, it's a very complex looking resource where you can define every little bit of how you want to make a cluster in whatever cloud you want. And so it's very complicated. It's similar to what you showed, where you have to choose the VPN, all the stuff. And then with Crossplane, you can offer a simplified API to be able to do all of that complex stuff. So some of the opinions are wrapped in there. But Crossplane offers a way to make a simplified API to be able to provision the very complicated thing like a cluster. And so now you're taking that simple API and then exposing it in a web portal. And so that it's even easier for people to fill out and use.
Yeah, Exactly. What I did long before this session is I created what you just mentioned, composition. And composition has two components. One is definition. Basically, this is the schema that this is the same schema that we saw in port, just in a different format. And this is what I sent to my Kubernetes cluster to say, extend the API using this schema. Basically, this creates that custom resource definition. Here is the version field that I filled in before and size and what's or not, right? And the second part of that is, and this is going to be big, this is the composition that says, hey, if somebody selects AWS PostgreSQL based on that schema, you should create a bunch of things like, what is it here? You should create a VPC and you should create a subnet and more subnets and internet gateway, and you should create some schema and tables and users and so on and so forth, right? So this is huge. This is massive, right? Because it's complex. But the good news is that the users using that as a service do not need to go into details, right? Do not need to spend 7 years trying to figure it out.
And now
I forgot whether you asked me a question or a statement.
Oh
so
no,
I
I
don't know
was
even what
just
I'm
I was
asking.
just kind of clarifying what we were looking at.
Uh-huh.
It was a statement. But now, like, the advantage of doing it that way as opposed to having all that complexity in the UI is now you can offer that simplified interface. You can offer it as a in the web portal, but you could also, like, developers who know stuff can access the API directly. Or like you said, you could put it in the IDE. Like, there are a lot of different ways you could interface with that one simplified API that you've made with Crossplane.
Exactly. That's one of the big things is that you say, I'm managing everything through an API, and then I can have 1 or 100 different ways to access that API. I could have accomplished exactly the same result by executing CURL or kubectl. Or if I wasn't too lazy, I could have created a Visual Studio Code extension, right? Because it becomes from the perspective of a service provider, and when I say service provider in this case, I don't mean AWS. I mean a person in a company that is offering something as a service. What you really care about is, hey, here's my service. Service can be defined like this, and that's the API part. And it will do this behind the scenes, not your problem, right? So basically, you as a service provider, once you expose your service through the API, you're finished. And then people can interact with it any way they like, right? It's just HTTP API. And
that's great.
Any way you like can be among many other things like web UI that I'm showing.
That's great.
Okay.
So you have a GitHub repo where people can play with this on their own, right?
Yes, it's not so almost this one, but it's actually not Devil's Paradox. I just forked it so that I don't mess up, but it's this one. vFarsig ports CRD's demo, right? The one I'm using today is a fork of it so that I can throw it to trash when I finished.
Awesome. Well, cool. We don't have any questions. It's rather a quiet chat today. If you're here,
okay,
feel free to ask any questions. Maybe it's because we've done such a perfect job of explaining everything.
Oh, I'm probably boring. But now if I look at Argo CD, I showed it for a second. A moment ago, there was only this one. Argo CD discovered that file and created, here we go, SQL claim. And this is basically now another representation of, and then Crossplane converted that SQL claim into subnets, VPCs, deployments, what's not. Bunch of things. What does matter here is that Argo CD detected that file, and if I go back to my cluster and do something like, let's see, Crossplane beta trace SQL claim silly demo namespace a team, if I didn't make a typo, right? Now, this is all variations of the same thing, different ways to visualize things. In this case, I can go directly to a cluster and say, give me all the resources, just like from Argo CD that were created by this thingy. And you see, it's all available. Actually, my database instance is already up and running. And from there on, if I go just to finish it, if I go back to port, if I ever find it, right, you could do the same. Hey, let's say catalog, right? This is the catalog of services that are managed by. Oh, this is not too zoomed in. Where you go, right? You can see that if you asked me before, is it read only for the schema discovery, and then I said schema discovery, but also for observability. Now the port has no idea what happened with that thing after it sent it to Git, but then it is observing the cluster and saying, okay, so if I find anything that looks like this, let me show it on a screen. And it discovered one, and here we go. This is the information fed back to port about the status of that something. Yeah, and now you can update, for example, and say, I don't know, I don't want it to be small, it could be medium. And if I click execute, then the process is always the same. I won't click, doesn't matter.
Okay.
But if I would click execute, it would again do the same thing. Go to Git, update the file, Argo CD detects it, puts it to a cluster, Crossplane does whatever needs to be done to make it happen. And I will not change or delete, right? Same thing. Delete is somewhere. Delete a SQL claim, and then it would be deleted from Git. So, in other words, UI in this case either gives you information about stuff or sends that information that you fill in to Git and let others figure it out.
I love that it's discoverable.
I talked too long.
No, you didn't at all. I love that it's discoverable. I have done a lot of these sorts of hosting gigs where I see people have to copy and paste a schema into a UI so the UI knows what to do. And this way makes so much more sense.
Yeah, why would you? Why would you do the same thing over and over again?
Yeah.
You have better things to do. I don't know. Watch Netflix.
Draw. Work on your drawing skills.
Yeah, work on your drawing skills. Exactly. You see, I'm showing people what to do, but I haven't been practicing. I mean, if I'm doing this in real world, then I would probably have more time to practice my drawing.
This isn't the real world, Victor. You're not going to practice for now.
Yeah.
I like how you have like shapes that aren't quite circles and not quite rectangles. Somewhere in between. You're a thought leader. Revolutionizing the space. This has been wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to share, Victor?
Try it out. Let me know. I mean, if somebody has idea how to extend. So first of all, if you go to the repo, you will find all the files. This is a workable demo. You can reproduce everything. I know that I'm not supposed to use slides, but I have slides that
It's okay.
I'm gonna give you the link only. Simply because in here, if you go to, I'm going to give it to Whitney. Whitney is going to somehow propagate it to everybody else.
It's true.
So if you go there, you will find instructions how to reproduce everything I did, more or less. I did not follow it exactly, but give or take. And if you see something that would be nice to add, let me know and I'll extend the demo.
Awesome. This is super fun. I'm going to hide your screen now.
Yeah. I thought you would hide me. That would be a more sensible course of action. Go away.
Soon enough. You can keep your hand there. I'm gonna say goodbye to everyone now. So this has been an absolute joy. Thanks everyone for joining today's Cloud Native Live. It's great to have Victor Farsik here teaching us about dumbing down developer platform consoles. Dumbing down and beautifying, right? I also really loved the interaction with the chat. Even though it was small, it was nice. Here at Cloud Native Live, we bring you the latest in cloud native code on Tuesdays and Wednesdays at this time, which is noon Eastern. Thanks for joining us today. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about runtime security with Tetragon. Thanks to those who watched the recording, and see you again soon. Thank you, Victor, so much for sharing your time and expertise.
Let me see whether they will dare to draw live.
I'll tell the presenter tomorrow they've received a dare from you. All right, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye.